A sign of the times, Americans banned from visiting the EU as Dr. Fauci offers a warning we could hit 100,000 cases a day in this country. Tesla, more valuable than ExxonMobil, and Larry David's take on social distancing. It's coming. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Wednesday, July 1st. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Carlo, we made it. We're halfway through.
You know what the question is now. When we look back on this year on New Year's Eve, do we say the first half of 2020 was just atrocious and it was all downhill from there? Or is it, God, that first half of the year was bad, but nothing compared to the second half? That's the question. Nobody knows the answer.
Yeah, and if you listened to Dr. Fauci yesterday, you'd probably think that perhaps the second half might be worse. So he testified in front of Congress. He said the country is on track to more than double its caseload to 100,000 new cases of coronavirus a day if nothing changes. He says we are going in the wrong direction. We're now hitting about 48,000 new cases a day. 8 states have hit new records, including a handful of states in the Midwest, Ohio, Wisconsin, Kansas, all these emerging hotspots right now.
That is a little bit worrisome because those are states that had generally been doing pretty good. So that's something we got to keep an eye on. The other thing, Jill, which you talked about, you mentioned in the tease, the EU borders are officially reopened today, but not if you're coming from the United States, which is just incredible. European Union countries approved a list of 15 countries, including Canada, New Zealand, Australia. They will not allow travelers from the United States, Russia, or Brazil, at least for the time being, just because of the state of the coronavirus outbreaks in those countries. So, we are being lumped in with Russia and Brazil, which I don't know if it's fair or not, but I certainly don't blame them given the way things are going here.
I was just listening to this report from Richard Engel, who's NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent, about the ban. And he was in Europe, and he said that all of those viral videos that we talk about, like the Starbucks Karen that we were talking about this week, those are fodder in Europe. They're playing them like mystified at what's going on in the United States. We're like the laughing stock of the world at this point. Rwanda, by the way, is allowed. People from Rwanda are allowed to travel to the European Union, and the United States, which is the wealthiest country in the world, is not. Did you watch any of the testimony yesterday? I don't know if you were on air.
No, I saw some clips. What was your takeaway from the good doctor?
My takeaway is that I noticed, to me, it felt like there was a noticeable shift in tone from not only Dr. Fauci, but some of the other health experts that they had, the head of the CDC, in that they feel like we're at the point of no return. Where it's like we're almost at the point where we're not going to be able to control this thing. And even in places like New York even in places like New York or New Jersey that have done so well in kind of just getting everything and flattening the curve and getting everything under control, like we're not going to be able to stop it because the flow of people in and out and people who are traveling. So to me, it felt like it wasn't defeatist. It was just like, it's too late, now all of these states are deciding that they want to issue mask warnings, mask requirements. Like, where were you 3 months ago? We've known that this works. So it's really disheartening, right? I guess it just falls back to individual responsibility, but it felt like something was different yesterday.
I think that's probably the right takeaway because it is. I don't even know what more to say. I mean, every time I open my mouth on the subject, I feel like we've just been talking ad nauseum about the same thing for months. But I think what you said about New York is right. I mean, what's happening in the Northeast is, it's almost a miracle, right? Massachusetts, no coronavirus deaths yesterday for the first time since March. but it doesn't really
I think New
matter that
York had
much.
13, I think,
Yeah,
by the way, which those are 13 lives that should not have been lost, but
of
that is
course, right.
not. We were at hundreds.
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, people are still going to come in and out, and if your fellow countrymen and women are dying, it's not like in other parts of the country you can't really feel that good about it. Although the death rate, I meant to actually check in on the death rate this morning and I haven't. So let me table that for tomorrow because I think it's starting to pick up a little bit, which would jive with the it being like the lagging indicator, but I don't know that for certain yet. So tomorrow I will
And
tell you.
one of the big reasons, and just one more point that I'll make on this, and then I think we should just move on, is that there were guidelines from the CDC on how states should reopen, and they were only supposed to reopen, or counties even, if cases had been going down for 14 days.
Right.
And many states didn't follow them, and they wanted to just open and get out there. And there's a reason that you don't, right? There's a reason that that's not what you do, and it's just a shame. I mean, there are places that didn't ever have to have any real outbreaks that are now dealing with just these huge numbers. We could have been Europe. We could, I'm not saying we could have had no deaths. I mean, this took us kind of, we're all pretty much caught off guard about how severe this was and how long the virus had been here, but we didn't have to be where we are right now. We could be Europe, we could be any one of these other countries, and back to travel plans, or just some more semblance of normal life.
Well, also on I think that what New York is doing, and I know there's some other states doing this too, but the phased reopening, where you let certain things reopen and then you wait 2 weeks, and if there's no increase, then you let these other things reopen. I think that's brilliant. I don't know why everyone's not doing that because it allows you to get the economy moving again, but in such a way that if you can pinpoint where the problems are, right? Which is
Right.
why
So
we keep
one
talking
of
about
the
the people who are
problems,
dying.
sorry to interrupt. One of the
Yep.
reasons that the experts are now saying we're out of control, like we're not going to be able to get this under control, is because the places that reopen so quickly, there's so many cases, there's not enough testing, and there's
Yeah.
not there's no tracing effort. Part of the whole
Right. So you
thing
don't know
was,
where it's coming from. Right.
yes. Um, okay. In other news, the Supreme Court has ruled 5-4 that states must give religious schools the same access to public funding that other private schools receive. Chief Justice, Roberts voted with the conservatives this time in a win for religious conservatives that will have very big implications on the concept of separation of church and state.
This ruling is sort of mystifying to me because the thing that I don't understand about it, and maybe this isn't my expertise area, but it's described as, like you said, as a win for this idea of religious freedom. But what I never understand about these religious freedom arguments is like, isn't it an assault on my religious freedom for my tax dollars to fund a school that teaches a religion that I don't subscribe? I mean, that's sort of like the whole point of church and state. Not to mention that this is just this ruling is probably a pretty big disaster for public education. A lot of the teachers unions were out yesterday saying like, the last thing that we need right now is is funding that could be going to public schools being diverted to private schools, and it should be on it's the onus of the members of that religion to fund their schools, which I tend to agree with. Um, but on the topic of the Supreme Court, Joe, they have one more big decision that we're waiting on, which is the fate of President Trump's tax returns, and we should be getting that in the next couple weeks. Usually they're done by now, but everything was obviously delayed because of the pandemic.
I'm glad you mentioned, though, in terms of the timing of this and a bit of the outcry from public school teachers. We're going to get the big jobs report tomorrow. And of course, we've seen crazy job loss in this country. But one of the concerns now is that public sector workers are really going to be hit because
Yeah,
their budgets are just have been decimated by this fight for coronavirus. So, in New York, the governor has warned of things like public school teachers, police. Um, so
yeah.
we'll see kind of which sectors are being most highly influenced this time
That's
around.
definitely the thing. Yeah, that's definitely the thing to watch in the next couple months is these states have to get their budgets out.
In politics, yesterday was Tuesday, and that means it was primary day in Colorado, where Lauren Boebert, a gun rights activist who is a believer in the QAnon conspiracy theory, I believe I said that correctly. So she unseated the five-term Republican incumbent in the House, Scott Tipton, who'd been endorsed by the president. John Hickenlooper, the former governor, easily won Colorado's Democratic Senate primary. Um, Carlo, really quickly, you were just before the show explaining to me what this QAnon conspiracy theory is.
QAnon.
Just,
Oh God,
just
how much time?
lay it
How much
on
time
us
do we
really
have?
quickly. We
It,
not much.
yeah, I almost don't even want to because it's so bananas. But it is a far right conspiracy that has really become the sort of like all encompassing um, eh, conspiracy theory. That it started with Pizzagate. Remember that thing that happened back in the 2016 election when there was this belief that this pizza restaurant in suburban Washington was this front for like a child sex ring. It's crazy. I don't even really want to give it more
Okay, this is
than
sorry.
that. But the point, no, it's an important point though, because I mean you're talking now about this thing getting into the mainstream body politic, right? I mean, you're going to have this woman, Lauren Boebert. I don't know if she'll win in November, but you could have. It's more than likely that you will have members of the House next term that are actual, you know, straight up believers in this conspiracy theory. But while we're talking about primaries, the results from last week's Democratic primary in Kentucky are finally official, which I wanted to mention because this was a very closely watched race. Amy McGrath, a retired Marine Corps fighter pilot, she won. She defeated Charles Booker, who was her progressive challenger, who a lot of liberals were hoping was gonna be able to pull this off, but he did not. McGrath is going to challenge Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, in November. She has pretty much, I shouldn't say no chance, but she's a serious underdog. Running as an establishment Democrat, a very conservative state, although she's running almost to the right of McConnell on some issues. But the only way she wins Kentucky is if Kentucky goes blue for Biden, which I think is pretty unlikely.
Carlos, speaking of Joe Biden, he actually held a press conference yesterday. So he's been getting out there a little bit more recently, and he took questions from the media. I thought came off pretty strong. One area that was a little weird, though, he was asked how his cognitive, how his cognitive ability is. And if he has any cognitive impairment. And he said he's constantly tested for cognitive decline. Um,
What does that even
and
mean?
and that was a little weird. It was like he was saying it to reassure everybody that
Uh,
he's all there, but I don't know if perhaps that may spark more questions. But I thought that he came off really, really strong. He said he reads he's asked about the Russia stuff with the Russia
yeah.
bounties on U.S. troops. He said, look, when he was vice president, he was reading those presidential briefings every single day. He hit the president hard on his coronavirus response. I think we're going to start seeing more of him.
Yeah. Although again, if I were him, I wouldn't even be doing anything because I would just be like, sitting back and letting President Trump implode in the polls, which is what he's doing. But I guess you do have to. I mean, you do have to get out there. You are running for president, so I certainly get it.
He said he's going to announce his VP pick sometime next month. So that'll be the next kind of big headline, I think. Another story that's kind of went by the wayside this week because of all the other news, but this affects millions of Americans. An analysis released this week of the country's federal flood map suggests that FEMA has massively undercounted the number of homes at serious risk of flooding in the coming years. According to the model, the first ever analysis of every single property in the US finds that at least 14.6 million homes are in jeopardy of flooding compared to the official count from the government of 8.7 million. So that's basically they're undercounting it by half.
This is pretty much because the federal government doesn't take into account for climate change. That's a big reason when it comes to the flood mapping, at least, which is obviously, needless to say, a big worry when it comes to flooding. But check out the link in the newsletter today. I linked to this sort of like interactive map that Bloomberg did on this, and you can see the risk by county, so you can see where your county is and what the flood risk is. But this is not just an issue for big coastal cities like New York, Los Angeles, and whatnot. This a lot of this has to do with creeks, riverbeds that aren't being taken into account in the FEMA numbers. And one of the other big takeaways, Jill, communities of color make up a disproportionate number of the most at-risk areas. And one of the reasons for that, some of these experts say, is because they're built on cheaper land in more historically segregated areas. So this, it's not a sexy story, as you'd say, but it's just something we got to continue to monitor and continue to talk about, right? All right, folks. Sorry, we've had a little bit of a technical meltdown here this morning, which would not be the first time. If you're a listener of this podcast, you've definitely seen how the sausage gets made here, and it's nobody's fault, but it's just everybody's working from home. So I think what happens is sometimes the network just gets overloaded. So we have lost Jill because Jill has to do her other job, which is anchor our morning show. So the rest of the pod is just me, but we're almost done anyway. So let's just get back to the news. The next story we were going to talk about is Tesla. Tesla stock is all-time high this morning, $1,080 a share, which is for the first time means that Tesla, an electric car company that only began less than 20 years ago, now has a higher market valuation than ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil, remember, was the world's most valuable company until just a few years ago. So Tesla is obviously, benefiting from huge demand. The thing that sent the stocks higher yesterday was Elon Musk saying that he thinks that the company is actually going to break even for the last quarter. Exxon, meanwhile, is just dealing with this global, plummeting of global oil demand. So it's just an interesting story, right? It's a symbolic milestone, if nothing else, indicating that investors are pretty much betting that the transition away from fossil fuels and into clean energy is happening, and it's happening now. Okay. Also, if you haven't noticed the sign at your local stores, and I wanted Jill for this story because she thought it was stupid, and I thought it was important. We're in the middle of a national coin shortage. Businesses around the country asking customers to pay with credit or debit cards or exact change until the Fed can get more currency into circulation. Now, this shortage stems from the height of the lockdowns, right, when there were much fewer in-person transactions, fewer people paying with cash. That means there were fewer pennies and dimes and nickels and quarters that actually made it into the money supply. So the Fed has directed the U.S. Mint to, quote, maximize coin production capacity. So in the next few weeks, this should loosen up. But it's an interesting thing. I noticed it myself at the grocery store yesterday, and perhaps some of you guys out there have noticed signs at your own stores. And if you have, I'm curious to hear, because I didn't even actually know that this was a thing until recently. So hit me up, Need2Know at Cheddar.com. Tell me your coin shortage stories. And finally, I wanted to end on some TV news, some lighter news today, since it's been so dour lately. HBO bringing back Curb Your Enthusiasm for an 11th season, which, again, if you listen to this podcast, Jill and I are both big Curb fans. But HBO says Larry David is currently at work writing the show. In the press release, David says, quote, "Believe me, I'm as upset about this as you are. One day I can only hope that HBO will come to their senses and grant me the cancellation I so richly deserve." But very excited to see how Larry David, his thoughts on mask wearing, social distancing, it should be good. Also, Netflix, they renewed Ozark a while ago, but they're now saying that the next season of Ozark will indeed be its last. That hit drama that follows the Bird family in the Ozarks. It'll be an expanded 14-episode season split into 2 7-episode parts. There's no start date for that yet. And finally, on another note, while we're talking TV, YouTube TV is about to get much more expensive. The so-called skinny bundle, one of the more popular of the skinny bundles, they're hiking their price, get this, from $50 a month to $65 a month. It will now cost you $65 a month to get YouTube TV as of July 1st, which is today. I mean, at that point, you really might as well just go to cable. It seems like, but also ESPN Plus, they're raising their prices from $5 a month to $6, which is not that big of a deal. But for the fact that there's no sports to watch, so certainly the timing seems a little bit questionable there. But this comes down to just programming costs. They keep rising. Cable companies had the same problem. But let's leave it there. Again, you can watch these podcasts on YouTube if you so desire. YouTube.com/Cheddar Live. You'll see our Need to Know playlist right there. We will be back hopefully to normal strength tomorrow. But until then, that's what you need to know for Wednesday, July 1st.